The champagne stung my eyes, a cruel mockery of celebration. They were toasting Helen, her diamond ring flashing under the chandelier, while my daughter, Lily, hid behind my legs, tears streaming down her face. They thought they had won. They thought a Vermont mother was nothing compared to their glittering world of wealth and privilege. They didn't know Ava was watching, planning, and remembering every single word. If you have a sister, a mother, or a daughter who deserves better, subscribe now. The invitation had seemed like an olive branch. My brother, Thomas, was marrying Helen, a woman whose family's fortune could probably buy and sell our quiet little town 10 times over. Thomas, always chasing the next big thing, had finally landed in the lap of luxury, and he insisted we come to the engagement party. Family, he'd said on the phone, a word that suddenly felt hollow. My husband, Ben, ever the optimist, thought it would be a good chance to reconnect, to show them our life, our kids, weren't so different. I, Ava, knew better. I'd always known Thomas craved a life beyond our simple upbringing, but I held on to a sliver of hope that he hadn't completely forgotten us. We drove down from Vermont, the car packed with our 2 children, Lily and Sam, and a carefully chosen gift, a hand-carved wooden bowl from a local artisan, something that represented our life, our values, something real. The moment we arrived at Helen's sprawling estate, a monument to excess, I felt a chill settle over me. The air itself seemed to hum with judgment. Helen greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a fleeting hug that felt more like an inspection. "So glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that tasted like arsenic. The party was exactly as I'd feared, a parade of designer dresses, surgically enhanced smiles, and conversations that revolved around stock prices and vacation homes. Lily and Sam, used to playing in the dirt and chasing fireflies, looked lost and overwhelmed. They clung to me, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and discomfort. I tried to steer them towards the buffet table, hoping some fancy pastries would ease their anxiety. That's when Helen swooped in, her voice cutting through the chatter like a shard of ice. "Oh, darling," she said to Lily, her tone dripping with condescension. "Is that dress from Walmart? So adorable." Lily, bless her heart, just stared at her, confused. Helen then turned to me, her smile widening, but her eyes glinting with something cruel. "You know, Ava, we were hoping for a more exclusive atmosphere. Perhaps next time we can arrange a separate playdate for the discount store kids." The words hit me like a physical blow. My face flushed, my hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to remain calm. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. Lily, however, didn't have the same restraint.
Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ran back to Ben, burying her face in his leg. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation, each word a tiny shard of glass twisting in my gut. I watched as Thomas laughed with Helen's friends, his arm draped possessively around her waist, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. He didn't even notice Lily's tears. He didn't even seem to notice us. We were invisible, a stain on his perfect new life. The drive back to Vermont was silent, save for the occasional sniffle from Lily. Ben tried to make light of the situation, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He loved my family, and he hated seeing them treat us this way. As for me, I was seething, not just with anger, but with a cold, calculating rage that I hadn't felt in years. They had humiliated my children. They had belittled my life. They had made me feel like I was nothing. But what they didn't know was that they had awakened something within me, something that had been dormant for far too long. They saw a quiet mother from Vermont. They saw someone they could dismiss, someone they could control. They were wrong, so terribly, horribly wrong. I replayed Helen's words in my head, each syllable fueling my resolve. "No room for your discount store kids," she had sneered. It was a declaration of war, and they didn't even realize they'd fired the first shot. The person I trusted most, the one who knew how much this tore at me, my own brother, Thomas, sided with her. The following weeks were a masterclass in forced normalcy. I plastered on a smile for the kids, packed lunches, and attended school events, all while a volcano of fury simmered beneath my skin. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. I'd lie awake at night replaying the engagement party in my head, each humiliation magnified in the darkness. Images of Lily's tear-streaked face haunted me. How could they be so cruel? How could my own brother stand by and watch? I tried to talk to Thomas, to explain how deeply their words had cut, but he brushed me off. "Ava, you're being too sensitive," he'd said, his voice laced with impatience. "Helen didn't mean anything by it. She's just direct." Direct? Her words were a calculated attack, a deliberate attempt to make us feel inferior. And my brother, blinded by wealth and status, was choosing to defend her. It felt like another betrayal, a deeper wound than the initial insult. I attempted to mend fences, swallowing my pride and calling Helen. I tried to explain that Lily was a sensitive child, that her comment had been hurtful. I suggested a play date, a chance for Lily and Helen's niece to connect. Helen's response was dismissive. "I'm afraid our schedules are quite full," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Perhaps when Lily is a little older and more accustomed to our social circles." The rejection was swift and brutal. It was clear they didn't want us in their world.
They saw us as a threat, a reminder of Thomas's humble beginnings, and they were determined to keep us at arm's length. The weight of the injustice pressed down on me, a suffocating blanket of anger and resentment. I found myself snapping at Ben, my patience wearing thin. I was short with the kids, my mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. I knew this wasn't healthy, that I was letting their negativity poison my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to be done. I couldn't just let them get away with it. I started researching Helen and Thomas, digging into their lives, searching for any chink their armor. I scoured social media, read news articles, and even hired a private investigator, a local woman named Carol, who understood the quiet rage of a mother scorned. Ben, initially concerned about my obsession, started to see the depth of my pain. He knew I wasn't just being petty. I was fighting for my children, for our dignity. He became my confidant, my sounding board, my rock in a sea of turmoil. He helped me channel my anger, to focus my energy on finding a way to expose their hypocrisy. Carol uncovered a few minor indiscretions, a forgotten debt, a questionable business deal, but nothing that would truly shake their gilded cage. I needed something bigger, something more impactful. I knew Helen and Thomas were meticulous, careful to maintain their pristine image, but everyone has secrets, and I was determined to find theirs. The pressure was mounting. The wedding was only a few months away, and I felt like I was running out of time. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to strike back without jeopardizing my own family. The sleepless nights continued, filled with swirling thoughts and desperate schemes. I was walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of sanity, fueled by a burning desire for justice. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, but they were about to learn that a mother's love, when scorned, can be a force of nature. The storm was brewing, and I was about to unleash it. They thought they had won, but the game was far from over. I was just getting started. The day I found Lily huddled in her closet, sobbing uncontrollably, was the day something inside me truly broke. I'd been so consumed with my own anger, so focused on plotting my revenge, that I'd failed to see the damage it was inflicting on my children. Lily, usually a bright and bubbly child, had become withdrawn and anxious. She refused to talk about what was bothering her, but I knew, deep down, that Helen's cruel words had burrowed into her heart like a splinter. I sat with her in the darkness of the closet, holding her close as she cried, and I realized that my quest for vengeance was coming at too high a price. I was so determined to protect my children from their cruelty that I failed to notice I was hurting them even more. That day, I felt like a failure as a mother. Ben watched me with concern etched on his face. He knew I was teetering on the edge, consumed by a darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. "Ava," he said gently, "this isn't you. You're letting them win." His words stung, but they were also a wake-up call. He was right. I was allowing Helen and Thomas to control my life, to dictate my emotions. I was sacrificing my own happiness and the well-being of my children for the sake of revenge. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were bloodshot, my face gaunt, my hair dull and lifeless. The spark that had once defined me, the joy and passion that had made me Ava, had been extinguished by bitterness and resentment. That night, I reached my absolute lowest point. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a bottle of pills, the darkness whispering insidious suggestions in my ear. The weight of everything felt unbearable. The humiliation, the betrayal, the pain I was inflicting on my children, it was all too much to bear. For a fleeting moment, I considered just ending it all, escaping the torment that had become my constant companion. Leaving this world felt easier than facing another day consumed by hate. But then, I pictured Lily's face, her tear-filled eyes searching for me. I imagined Sam, his little arms reaching for a hug. And I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't abandon them. They needed me. I was their mother, their protector, and I couldn't let Helen and Thomas take that away from them. With trembling hands, I pushed the pills away, and I looked up. I would do something about this. They have no idea what's coming. I spent the next few days in a fog of exhaustion and self-reproach. I barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of despair, with no hope of rescue. But slowly, gradually, a flicker of resolve began to ignite within me. It wasn't a burning flame, but a tiny spark, a fragile ember that refused to be extinguished. I started small, focusing on the things I could control. I made sure Lily and Sam had healthy meals. I read them bedtime stories, and I spent hours just listening to them talk about their day. I reconnected with Ben, apologizing for my behavior and thanking him for his unwavering support. I started exercising again, channeling my anger into physical activity. I went for long runs in the woods, pushing myself to the point of exhaustion, and slowly the darkness began to recede. I knew I couldn't erase the pain they had caused, but I could choose how I responded to it. I could choose to rise above their negativity, to reclaim my life, and to protect my children from their toxic influence. I decided to stop dwelling on the past and to start focusing on the future. I may have lost this initial skirmish, but the war isn't over. I started to shift my thinking. Instead of focusing on revenge, I began to focus on justice. I realized that true revenge wasn't about inflicting pain. It was about exposing the truth. It was about holding Helen and Thomas accountable for their actions and preventing them from hurting anyone else. I went back to Carol, the private investigator, but this time I had a different request. I didn't want dirt. I wanted information. I wanted to understand Helen and Thomas's world, their motivations, their vulnerabilities. I wanted to find their weakness, the chink in their armor that would allow me to strike back with precision and force. I realized that their biggest weakness was their image. They were so obsessed with maintaining their pristine reputation, with projecting an image of wealth and perfection, that they were blind to the cracks in their own foundation. They thought they were untouchable, that their money and status would protect them from any consequences. But they were wrong. Everyone is vulnerable. Everyone has secrets, and I was determined to find theirs. The quiet mother from Vermont was gone. In her place stood a woman with a mission, a woman who was no longer afraid to fight for what she believed in. I was done playing nice. I was done being silent. The game had changed, and this time I was playing to win. They awakened a sleeping giant, and now they will pay the price for doing so. I was recording everything from now on. They had no idea what they were up against. The recording became my lifeline. Every interaction, every phone call, every staged smile at family dinners, it all went on record. I purchased a high-quality audio recorder disguised as a pen, slipping it into my pocket at every opportunity. I researched the law surrounding recordings, ensuring I was operating within the bounds of legality, covering my tracks with the same meticulousness Helen and Thomas used to hide their true selves. I knew that any slip-up, any hint of my plan would alert them and ruin everything. I smiled sweetly at Helen, complimenting her taste and decor, all the while my pen diligently captured her every word, every subtle dig disguised as a compliment. "Oh, Ava, that's a lovely bag," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "Is it vintage? How charming." I'd laugh politely, my eyes fixed on hers, and respond with a disarming, "Why, thank you, Helen. It's a family heirloom, actually, just like some people's values, I suppose." The pen would keep rolling. Thomas, emboldened by his upcoming nuptials and Helen's constant praise, became even more careless. He'd brag about his business deals, his lavish purchases, his growing influence within Helen's social circle. He'd call ostensibly to check in, but really to gloat. "You wouldn't believe the vintage wine Helen managed to get for the wedding," he'd say, a smugness lacing his voice. "A 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. It cost more than your entire car, Ava." I'd feign admiration, offering congratulations, while subtly steering the conversation towards topics I knew would reveal his true character. The way he treated his staff, his casual dismissals of people he deemed beneath him. Each word was another nail in their coffin, carefully documented and stored away. There was one particularly tense dinner where I almost blew my cover. Helen, fueled by alcohol and a captive audience, started to recount the story of our first meeting, embellishing the details to make me seem even more unsophisticated and out of place. I felt my face flush with anger, my hands clenching beneath the table. But I forced myself to smile, to play along with her twisted narrative, knowing that the recorder was capturing every word, every nuance of her cruelty. Lily, sensing my discomfort, reached for my hand, her small fingers squeezing mine reassuringly. In that moment, I knew I couldn't back down. I couldn't let them continue to belittle and humiliate us. I had to see this through. For Lily, for Sam, for myself. Carol, my private investigator, proved invaluable. She helped me navigate the complexities of digital forensics, teaching me how to recover deleted files, how to trace IP addresses, how to uncover hidden information online. I learned how to use burner phones, how to encrypt my emails, how to protect my online identity. It was like entering a whole new world, a world of shadows and secrets where nothing was as it seemed. She uncovered a series of emails between Thomas and Helen that were particularly damning. They revealed a pattern of deceit and manipulation, a willingness to step on anyone who stood in their way. There were emails discussing ways to undermine a business rival, emails plotting to sabotage a colleague's career, and even emails detailing their efforts to keep Thomas's ex-girlfriend quiet after he ended their relationship. The evidence was mounting, painting a picture of two people who were not only arrogant and entitled, but also deeply corrupt and malicious. I realized that their wealth and status were built on a foundation of lies and deceit, and I was determined to expose it. The anticipation was building, the wedding was fast approaching, and I knew I had to act soon. I spent hours poring over the evidence, organizing the recordings, and crafting a plan that would deliver the maximum impact. I consulted with a lawyer, a friend from college who specialized in defamation and privacy law. I wanted to ensure that my actions were legally sound, that I wouldn't be exposing myself to any legal repercussions. He advised me to proceed with caution, to focus on verifiable facts, and to avoid making any unsubstantiated accusations. He helped me craft a statement that was both damning and defensible, a statement that would expose their hypocrisy without opening me up to legal liability. I knew the timing was crucial. I couldn't act too soon, or they would have time to retaliate. I couldn't act too late, or the opportunity would be lost. I decided to wait until the day of the wedding, the day when they would be most vulnerable, the day when their carefully constructed facade would be on full display for the world to see. I envisioned the scene playing out in my head, the lavish ceremony, the designer dresses, the champagne flowing freely, and then the bomb. I knew it would be devastating, that it would shatter their carefully cultivated image and expose them for who they really were. But I also knew it was necessary. They had crossed a line, they had hurt my children, and they needed to be held accountable. I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, rehearsing the words, honing my delivery, ensuring that my voice was steady and resolute. I wanted to convey the truth with clarity and conviction, to leave no room for doubt or misinterpretation. I knew it would be the hardest thing I had ever done, but I was prepared. I was ready to face them, to confront them with their lies, and to reclaim my dignity. The wedding day arrived like a storm cloud. I packed my bag with the evidence, the recordings, the emails, and the statement, feeling a mix of fear and excitement churning within me. It was time. The day I discovered the truth about Thomas's business dealings, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Carol had been digging into his company's financial records, tracing a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. What she found was far more sinister than simple tax evasion. Thomas was involved in a massive fraud scheme, siphoning funds from investors and using the money to finance his lavish lifestyle. But the worst part was the connection to a local charity that Helen championed publicly. It was all a front. Thomas was funneling money into the charity and then diverting it back into his own accounts, using the donations to fund his personal expenses and to prop up his failing businesses. The so-called philanthropic work that Helen parades in front of everyone was a complete lie. They were robbing from the needy to line their own pockets. I felt a surge of fury so intense that I thought I might shatter into a million pieces. They weren't just arrogant and entitled. They were predators, preying on the vulnerable and exploiting their trust. This wasn't just about hurting me. It was about hurting innocent people, people who deserved better. The glass I was holding shattered in my hand as my vision blurred. I felt a sting as a shard of glass pierced my skin, but I barely registered the pain. The only thing I could feel was rage. I knew I had to act quickly to expose their lies before they could cause any more damage. I decided to set a trap, to lure them into a situation where they would have no choice but to reveal their true selves. I knew that Helen was obsessed with social media, constantly posting pictures of their perfect life and soliciting validation from her followers. She lived for the likes, the comments, the attention. I decided to use this vanity against her. I created a fake social media account, posing as a wealthy philanthropist who was interested in donating to their charity. I crafted a profile that was designed to appeal to Helen's vanity, pictures of exotic vacations, designer clothes, and exclusive events. I started following her, liking her posts, and leaving flattering comments. It didn't take long for her to notice me. She sent me a private message, thanking me for my interest in their charity and inviting me to a private reception at their home. This was exactly what I wanted. I accepted the invitation, knowing that this was my chance to gather more evidence and to set the stage for my final act. The reception was everything I expected, a lavish display of wealth and privilege. The house was filled with impeccably dressed guests, sipping champagne and making polite conversation. Helen was in her element, flitting from group to group, basking in the attention and admiration. Thomas was by her side, his arm draped possessively around her waist, his eyes scanning the room for potential business opportunities. I played my part perfectly, charming the guests, complimenting Helen on her taste in art, and feigning interest in Thomas's business ventures. All the while, my pen was recording everything. I managed to corner Thomas alone for a few minutes, steering the conversation towards the charity and his involvement in it. I asked him pointed questions about the finances, the donations, and the beneficiaries. He became increasingly nervous, his answers evasive and contradictory. He started to sweat, his eyes darting around the room as if he was afraid someone would overhear our conversation. I pressed him harder, pushing him to the brink of panic. Finally, he snapped. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin, and hissed in my ear, "You need to be careful what you say. You don't know who you're dealing with." I smiled sweetly and pulled away, my heart racing. I had him. I had baited the trap, and he had walked right into it. The wedding is tomorrow. He has no idea what's coming. The wedding was a grotesque spectacle of wealth. The manicured lawns of Helen's family estate were crammed with guests, all dressed in their finest clothes, sipping champagne and whispering behind their hands. Helen, in a dress that probably cost more than my house, floated around like a queen, her face plastered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thomas, ever the smarmy charmer, greeted guests with a forced enthusiasm, his gaze constantly darting around, calculating and assessing. I watched them from the sidelines, a ghost in their paradise, my hand gripping the small bag containing the evidence that would shatter their world. The ceremony began, a nauseating display of vows and promises that I knew were hollow. As the officiant droned on, I felt a surge of nausea. This charade had to end, now. As they reached the part where objections were to be raised, I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady despite the tremor in my hands. I object. The word ripped through the air like a thunderclap, silencing the murmuring crowd. All eyes turned to me, and the color drained from Helen's face. Thomas's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of fury. "Ava, what are you doing?" he hissed, stepping towards me. I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "I'm here to expose the truth," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "The truth about your fraudulent business dealings, your exploitation of charities, and your deceitful manipulation of everyone around you." I pulled out the recorder, the pen that had captured their every lie, and pressed play. Helen's voice filled the air, dripping with condescension as she spoke about me, mocking my background, my clothes, my supposed lack of sophistication. Then came Thomas's voice, bragging about his shady business deals, his callous treatment of his employees, and his contempt for anyone he considered beneath him. The recording played snippets of their phone calls, their private conversations, their carefully crafted facade crumbling with each passing second. Then the emails, read aloud by my lawyer friend who stood nearby, detailing their plot to undermine a business rival, their scheme to sabotage a colleague's career, and their efforts to silence Thomas's ex-girlfriend. But the final blow was the recording from the charity reception, where Thomas, cornered and desperate, threatened me, revealing his true nature. The crowd gasped, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Helen stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief, her perfect mask shattered into a million pieces. Thomas lunged at me, his face contorted with rage, but Ben stepped in front of me, blocking his path. "Stay away from her," Ben said, his voice low and menacing. "This is over." I then presented the evidence to law enforcement officials, who were conveniently nearby, ensuring the wheels of justice would start turning immediately. As the police took Thomas away in handcuffs, Helen collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Her family, her friends, her entire world had turned against her in an instant. The wedding guests began to disperse, their whispers following her like a swarm of angry bees. The carefully constructed image of wealth and perfection was gone, replaced by the stark reality of their deceit and corruption. The fallout was swift and devastating. Thomas's business empire crumbled, his investors pulling out, his partners abandoning him. He faced multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Helen's reputation was ruined, her social circle vanished, and her family disowned her. The charity was shut down, its name forever tarnished by their greed. They lost everything: their money, their status, their freedom. I watched it all unfold with a sense of detached satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting my children, about holding them accountable for their actions, and about preventing them from hurting anyone else. As I walked away from the wreckage of their lives, I felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. My children rushed to me, Lily and Sam, their faces lighting up as they clung to my legs. "Mommy, you did it!" Lily exclaimed, her eyes shining with pride. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, baby," I said. "We did it." They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's about reclaiming your power, about standing up for yourself and for those you love. It's about ensuring that those who abuse their power are held accountable for their actions. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.